Tonight on CBC Vancouver News.
When you hit the open roads this summer, you aren't leaving COVID-19 behind.
BC's top doctor with a warning and advice about your summer travel plans. Also,
it's just a hard feeling knowing that I can't go home.
Relief from separated families as Ottawa eases some border restrictions. And
the traffic is not too much, right?
why police say more people are speeding.
You could just hold up your driver's license for me, please.
And what officers are doing about it.
This is CBC Vancouver News.
Good evening. Well, there are a lot of questions around summer travel in BC. Can you do it, or must you stick close to home?
BC's top doctor says it's all in the preparation. Bonnie Henry is urging those who are eager to vacation within our province to do everything possible to lessen the impact on the towns you're traveling to.
Dan Burrett joins us live with more on this. Dan, what specifically is Henry recommending?
2 words, Anita and Mike. Call ahead. Dr. Henry says she knows people are thinking about hitting the beaches, the ferries, the campgrounds, getting out of town and enjoying nature and the sights of our gorgeous, very vast province. The run on the provincial camping reservation website shows people are eager to get outside. But if you're planning to do just that, she wants you to think carefully about your impact, especially on smaller communities which don't have the healthcare resources we do here in Metro Vancouver. Now, some communities are counting on tourists this summer. Others are asking you not to visit, at least right now. She wants anyone who wants to be a responsible traveler to call the local tourism association or even the Chamber of Commerce ahead of time to see what that community's situation is and if you ought to visit at all.
If you're going to a smaller community, be self-sufficient. Bring what you need with you. Same for camping, making sure that you have what you need and that you can take the precautions that you need, particularly if somebody becomes ill. We know, as we've talked about, that when this virus is anywhere, we're at risk, all of us, collectively.
Henry also has some advice for British Columbians who may see visitors come into their community. We know some people in cities and towns in BC have already made people driving cars with Alberta license plates feel very unwelcome. Henry says she has some advice for travelers and locals, and it's 2 words.
Be understanding of those in whose communities you may be going to and who may be coming to your community. We can't assume that we understand everybody's story. A visitor may be traveling for work, may be traveling to support a friend or a family member.
And keep this in mind as we move further into phase 2 of reopening in BC. Next week will mark 2 14-day incubation periods since BC began reopening in May. Health Minister Adrian Dix says he's not ready to give a firm day on when we might move into another phase 3, with more businesses and services reopening since we are still seeing more COVID-19 cases. Anita, Mike?
All right, Dan, thanks very much for reporting live tonight. Let's get the latest numbers now on those cases. There are 183 active COVID-19 cases in our province, and there are also no new deaths since the government's last update last Thursday. This is the first time since the pandemic began that health officials did not give a weekend update. So keep in mind the following numbers span the past 72 hours. There were 29 cases in the last 3 days, 9 of those since yesterday. There is also 1 fewer long-term care outbreak. Only 4 outbreaks remain in BC. 16 people are still in hospital, a quarter of those in intensive or critical care. The number of people who have recovered from COVID-19 is now more than 2,300.
And a BC doctor says the Chinese community's early efforts to curb COVID-19 should be applauded.
Yeah, numbers from the province show Richmond, the city with the highest concentration of Chinese residents in BC, has the lowest percentage of cases in the Lower Mainland.
But as Lian Young reports, the Chinese community has instead been stigmatized for it.
This has been routine for Dr. Patrick Wu since February.
I just knew in the back of my head that we need to do something to protect ourselves.
Wearing masks everywhere he goes, months before public health officials recommended it. At home in Richmond, it was no big deal, but in cities with fewer Chinese, he says it made some uncomfortable.
Sometimes when we drive in the car and then I forgot to take off my mask, and then so a driver will pull up and give me a look. So yeah, they weren't used to seeing people wearing masks, even driving a car or going to a grocery store.
Despite the stigmatization, many Asian Canadians have adopted masks and self-quarantining well before it was mandated. Kenny Zhang says even in January, some Chinese families drove 2 cars to the airport for pickups, one for locals, the other for the returning traveler.
A lot of people travel back from China to BC, and they put them voluntarily in a self-isolation for 14 days. A lot of cases, my friends, my colleagues,
they saw it coming and they did the right thing. And they did the right thing for both themselves and the rest of the community. So they should be applauded for that.
Numbers from the province are telling. Richmond, the city with the highest concentration of Chinese residents in the province at 54%, has the lowest percentage of cases on the Lower Mainland. They've also had no new cases since mid-May, the only health region in the Lower Mainland where that's happened.
Whether that is a direct impact of that early distancing and early aggressive maneuvers on behalf of the community, it's impossible to say, but clearly there's an association there.
With what we know already, there's no question that those Chinese communities where they took early action, they saw lower numbers of cases among their population. So I think that evidence is pretty clear.
Ian Young believes those good behaviors should be acknowledged. He reported on the issue when Chinese customers stayed home and business plummeted.
One of the key blunders was that officials were trying to pass this phenomenon off as something to do with racism, or that this was something to do with an overreaction.
When we asked Dr. Bonnie Henry about it on Thursday, she says the Chinese community did take the measures, quote, very seriously, but their contribution was part of the larger role that public health workers were implementing.
As for Wu, he says he's just happy he did what he could to help protect the community. Leanne Young, CBC News, Richmond.
Some relief tonight for family members separated by U.S.-Canada border restrictions.
Starting at midnight, immediate family members of citizens or permanent residents will be allowed to cross into our country.
But as Deborah Goebel reports, everyone will still be required to self-quarantine for 14 days.
For almost 3 months with the border closed to all but essential travel, Christine Markovics has been stuck at home in Birch Bay, Washington, unable to cross the border to see her 81-year-old Canadian mom, even though her mom lives only 15 minutes away in White Rock.
It's just hard. I was able to, before, come and go as I please.
6 weeks ago, they started meeting on Zero Avenue, pulling up lawn chairs, making sure not to cross over the invisible line.
But it's still, it's just, no, it's not the same.
Then this morning, she heard this, the Canadian government announcing it would be loosening border restrictions, allowing some families to reunite.
Immediate family members will be defined as spouses, common law partners, dependent children and their children, parents, and legal guardians.
Across the border in Vancouver, Meralda Riaz also heard the news.
This hasn't been very easy for me. And I just feel like I feel like crying. I'm sorry.
Her 93-year-old American mother lives alone in Bellingham. It's been 3.5 months since they've seen each other.
She was so happy that I could go.
All I saw was that we can go to Canada to see our immediate family, and so it was tearful, and I was overcome with joy.
But then came the rest of the announcement.
Immediate family members must plan to stay in Canada for at least 15 days.
And then after I read it, and then it kicked in that
it's putting a lot of strain on me. You know, if I am in quarantine, because I cannot go.
Because she works full time.
I actually was thinking to ask our Prime Minister to help me in this regard. Is there a way that I cannot be in quarantine? Maybe when I get back, I get tested next day or something like that. And if I am negative, then I don't do quarantine.
But now I have to choose again, do I leave my husband for 2 weeks?
Like truck drivers and other essential workers who don't have to self-quarantine, they both wonder if somehow the restrictions could be loosened up for essential families as well.
She asked me almost every day, when this is gonna finish.
Deborah Goebel, CBC News, Vancouver.
The search continues along the Fraser River in Maple Ridge for a plane that went missing on Saturday afternoon. The small plane left Boundary Bay Airport but never landed. The RCMP are now saying the plane is believed to have crashed into the river. A witness reported seeing a small white airplane flying low above the Fraser. The VPD's Marine Unit is assisting with a vessel with sonar searching capabilities, and the RCMP Air Services helicopter is also patrolling the area. So far, no debris or trace of the plane has been found.
BC family members of an Indigenous woman fatally shot by police in New Brunswick arrived in that province this morning to help support her grieving mother and 5-year-old daughter. Moore died Thursday after an Edmundston police officer came to her home on a well-being check. Police said the officer shot the 26-year-old in self-defense because she had a knife and was making threats. Moore's death has sparked an outcry in light of protests against systemic racism in policing in the United States and Canada. Family members say they hope to meet with investigators to find out more about what happened. A coalition of Maliseet First Nations is calling for an independent probe of the New Brunswick justice system.
We as Indigenous leaders need to be at those tables. We need to have Indigenous voices when inquiries are done in order to make sure that it's a fair process for everyone here in our territory.
A healing walk in Moore's honor will be held in Madawaska this Saturday.
Time now to check in with meteorologist Brett Soderholm. Brett, I have been hearing a lot of people complain today, and I think they're hoping for some good news from you.
Well, I hope that I can provide a little bit of good news. I'm going to take the positive spin that with rain on the way, we're going to be able to, tone down our fire danger rating. Our vegetation will thrive. But I guess maybe the most positive news is that we do have some significant rain coming, but it's going to finally be on a Tuesday as opposed to a weekend day. And I want to show you what that's going to be looking like over the next couple of hours. In terms of right now, our current temperatures are sitting at about 15 or 16 degrees. And this is kind of on the cool side of seasonal right now, but nothing too out of the question. And if you look at our satellite and radar imagery, we had a few showers to start off the day, and you can see those still kind of fizzling out toward eastern portions of, say, Chilliwack, getting in along Highway 3. But what I've got my eye on is going to be coming from the north and west. We've got a system that's going to be bringing widespread rain to the region, and temperatures as well are going to be taking a pretty significant hit here. I want to show you as we go through the next few hours, it's going to be remaining dry, probably just see some increasing cloud cover, but by early in the pre-dawn hours, we're going to see that showers coming in rather, changing over into rain, such that by tomorrow morning, 12 degrees and rain, that is truly a January-like feel. Now, the one upside, if I can give a little bit more good news, our official start to the summer is less than 2 weeks away, and that means our days are still getting longer. So when I come back, I'm going to have a full forecast and look at what we can be expecting across the province.
We'll look forward to that. Thanks, Brett. Passengers of BC ferries will soon be required to wear non-medical masks on some routes. The new rule to help reduce the spread of COVID-19 will come into effect on the 15th. That means anyone over the age of 2 on a sailing that's longer than a half hour will need a mask. The new edict is all part of a directive from Transport Canada, but the masks are only for situations on the boat when people can't maintain physical distancing. People will have to bring their own. The company will not be providing masks.
Might be a little tough for a 2.5-year-old to keep a mask on, but fingers crossed, I guess. Well, there's an impact of COVID-19 we perhaps weren't expecting: excessive speeding.
Yeah, we are seeing a lot of it, and police say drivers are taking advantage of near-empty streets. But as Renee Filipponi explains, not everyone is getting away with it.
On the side of BC's busiest highway, RCMP Constable Mike Moore takes his time waiting for someone not to. When a car speeds by, he jumps into action. Police say speeding has become all too common since COVID-19 restrictions.
I stopped you for speeding today. If you could just hold up your driver's license for me, please.
The driver admits quiet roads are partially to blame for his speed.
The traffic is not too much, right? So, enjoy the ride.
He was speeding, but not nearly as fast as some drivers Constable Moore has pulled over in recent weeks.
This is a 90-kilometer-an-hour zone, and I have caught some folks doing, 170 kilometers an hour. Some people took it upon themselves to think that, this is the Wild West now. I'm going to open it up on these barren roads.
This video was shot in Toronto, a 21-year-old doing stunts in a busy intersection. And this, filmed by a driver in the UK at speeds of 200 miles an hour. That's equal to more than 320 kilometers.
All of the systems that we have, like vehicle passenger compartment areas that are maintain their integrity in most types of crashes, seat belts and airbags, all of those systems will fail at those speeds.
In an effort to get people to slow down, road safety checks are up across BC. Organizers say most people who drive by slow down.
For the few that can't, we have enforcement, and they'll get a ticket. And for those that are 40 over the limit, they're going to have their vehicle impounded.
As lockdown measures ease, more cars are returning to the roads, and along with them, more enforcement officers who say they are ready to ticket or tow to keep the roads safe. Renee Filipponi, CBC News, Burnaby.
More cars on the road now, but so maybe that'll get people to slow down. But man, just driving here every day, you certainly see it. People are picking up the speed.
But I am seeing a lot of police out. A lot of police, so
there you go.
Be aware.
Keep the speed down. Well, a reminder, you can watch this newscast live on CBC Gem. The free app is also where you can find other CBC programs.
CBC Vancouver is also on Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram. And please give us both a follow on Instagram and Twitter as well.
Prime Minister Justin Trudeau wants police to start wearing body cameras. It's a move that comes in the midst of a global wave of mass protest against police brutality. What the RCMP thinks about it, next.
Thank you for watching our ad-free online live stream. Well, artists around the world are using graffiti to show their solidarity with the Black Lives Matter movement.
In Ontario, they have chosen Toronto's well-known Graffiti Alley to display their support. But as Talia Ricci reports, the hope is that it grows beyond that location.
If you take a stroll through Graffiti Alley, you'll notice it's undergoing a transformation. It's part of a project called Paint the City Black, and we're going to meet one of the co-founders, Jesse Pacho.
When we started, we wanted to definitely use our skills to speak to something that was, greater than us or greater than graffiti in any sense. And so the one directive that we gave to people, or request anyway, was that they use black as one of the main colorways in the individual pieces. This panther is done by one of the other organizers of the event, Nick Sweetman. Yeah, it's personally one of the favorites in the event, so I definitely just wanted to start here to kick off the tour. This wall was done in a collaboration of 4 artists. So starting on the right side, we see a portrait done by Adrian Hales, a local Toronto artist, of Regis, who recently passed away in High Park. I actually did this piece here. So what the lettering says is Big Floyd, which is George Floyd's MC name. Moving over, we see a portrait right here done by a local artist named Bubs. And this portrait is really important for the community and the cause because this is another individual, Jamal Francique, who passed away under similar circumstances right here at home in Peel Region.
It's really powerful that the graffiti community has responded so well. And I think it's the first time that I've really seen this alleyway be so alive for a cause that's greater than just painting beautiful things.
It's very powerful. It's one of the only portraits in the alleyway done with color. You'll notice it says, "I can't breathe," and then surrounding the lettering it says, "But we can hear you." Art in itself and the nature of it is so transformative. I mean, the act of creating art is to transform something, right? And so that was the one thing we wanted, is just to really raise awareness for what exactly is happening in the world and to speak out against it.
So while this project started in Graffiti Alley, the founders are hopeful that this movement grows well beyond this location. They're asking any artists who want to participate, or for anyone who shares the work, to use the hashtag #PaintTheCityBlack. Talia Ricci, CBC News, Toronto.
Pretty cool. I know when I go around and I see some of this graffiti and then learn about the meaning behind it, it's pretty amazing to see. So
yeah, maybe it'll move beyond the alley there too.
Maybe even some here in Vancouver. All right, stick with us. We'll have the latest headlines related to the Black Lives Matter movement next.
Prime Minister Justin Trudeau wants police across our country to start wearing body cameras. The idea is to improve transparency by recording interactions with the public. Tonight, the RCMP says it will outfit some Mounties with the cameras. As David Cochran reports, this is something American police have been doing with mixed results.
Many people in this country simply do not feel protected by the police. In fact, they're afraid of them.
Strong words backed up by troubling images. Cell phone video showing an RCMP officer ramming an Inuk man with his truck before more officers pile on to make an arrest. Proof, the Prime Minister says, the RCMP needs body cameras.
It is something that is, in my opinion, what we need to move forward with.
Every day, cell phones and TV cameras provide new support for that argument. But while this was caught on camera, blind spots remain. Like in New Brunswick, where a police officer shot and killed Chantel Moore, a 26-year-old Indigenous woman. There's no known video of that shooting.
When we talk about police accountability, we're talking about people being able to see with their own two eyes what a police officer has done.
This police officer turned professor says body cameras should be standard equipment. But while they may improve accountability, they are expensive, and there's no consensus they reduce violence.
The response from the Prime Minister is more reactive than is actually based on hard facts.
As proof, Samuels Wortley points to the U.S., where body cameras are used widely, including in Minnesota.
But clearly that hasn't changed anything. As it was noted during George Floyd's unfortunate incident, the police officer did have a body camera, and it actually was a civilian that captured the killing of George Floyd.
Still, it appears the RCMP has gotten the Prime Minister's message. In a statement, the force says it will take steps to implement body cameras across the RCMP. David Cochran, CBC News, Ottawa.
Mourners gathered in Houston today to pay their final respects to George Floyd in his hometown. It's the final stop in a series of memorials retracing the life of the man whose death in police custody has sparked a global call for change. Stephen D'Souza has more on him and his community's loss.
Houston's 3rd Ward neighborhood is where George Floyd grew up, spent the majority of his life before moving to Minneapolis. And this is a rough neighborhood, and the violence is literally written on the wall of the side of the supermarket. Names of people who have died here, hearts beside the names of people who were killed in gun violence, doves beside younger children. And this is a community that knew George Floyd intimately. He was a two-sport athlete, basketball and football in high school. He also was part of a local hip-hop crew. People knew him as somebody who was a father figure to the community, somebody who wanted to make a difference. And so they see his death as a wake-up call, as something important, not just for this community, but for the world.
And look, we got a powerful angel back there. That was a powerful angel. Only an angel that power can move the world, so I want everybody to know that. When God takes one of his powerful angels, it will move the world. Because guess what? He's been taking all these angels, and he ain't got y'all attention yet. So now he got the world attention, and that was a powerful angel. And his life told a story, you can tell.
We also had a chance to speak with George Floyd's uncle Roger, who, like people in the community here, has taken on the role of a spokesperson and advocate for change. something they say is very important in the wake of George Floyd's death.
I look at my nephew at this point, and it's by God's grace that he is a sacrifice to make a difference. And I believe, and I'm going to do everything in my power with whatever platform that's given me to bring about real change.
Thousands today gathered at the Family's Church in Houston for a public memorial service, a chance for the community to say goodbye to someone they saw as family. Tomorrow there will be a public service, and then there will be a procession taking the body to the burial site where he will be laid to rest beside his late mother. Stephen D'Souza, CBC News, Houston.
And the call for reform and defunding the police has been a rallying cry for those protesting anti-black violence in the U.S. And as Katie Simpson reports, it's starting to shape the debate in Washington.
George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery.
The names from lawmakers just kept coming. Black Americans whose lives have been cut short. Before introducing their new police reform legislation, Democrats took a knee for exactly 8 minutes and 46 seconds to honor George Floyd.
We're here because Black Americans want to stop being killed.
We cannot settle for anything less than transformative structural change.
The proposal would create a national database to track officer misconduct. Police would be banned from using chokeholds. More racial bias training would be encouraged, and federal officers would be required to wear body cameras. Reforms long seen as overdue.
We have 400 years of policing in this country that had negative relationships between the police and communities of color. We want the officers to empathize with the communities that they're serving. Not the communities that they're policing, the communities that they're serving.
The proposal falls short of what some demonstrators want, a defunding of police, with some money for law enforcement redirected toward preventative community safety measures instead, which is what the city council in Minneapolis voted to do yesterday in an attempt at completely reforming its police.
I stand by that bold statement, but the work ahead of us will be long. It will include every member of our community. It has to.
They want to end the police department, quote, end the police department in Minneapolis. End it. What does that mean, end it?
The president met with law enforcement officials today to discuss reform, suggesting Americans won't be safe if demonstrators get their way.
We won't be ending our police force in a city. I guess you might have some cities that want to try, but it's going to be very sad situation if they did, because people aren't going to be protected.
It's been 20 years since the so-called honor killing of Maple Ridge's Jassy Sidhu. After the break, why, even after 2 decades, the case isn't likely to be resolved anytime soon.
It's time to make your voice heard. CBC British Columbia is hosting a virtual town hall to discuss racism, and we want to hear from you.
It's a global thing.
Just because I was an Asian.
Things like this should not exist.
But they need to hear our voices.
Send us your thoughts and stories by heading to cbc.ca/racism town hall. Unmasking Racism, June 17th at 7 p.m.
Tune in on CBC Radio 1, Facebook Live, and on GEM.
It was 5 days ago that a bomb ripped through a British Columbia hydropower station under construction on Vancouver Island. Jerry Thompson reports the police are having a tough time solving the case.
Since Monday, the damage estimate has been upped to nearly $6 million as hydro engineers got a closer look at the extent of damage. And although RCMP investigators have been combing the rubble for clues and feeding background information about environmental groups into a computer, they still are not very far along in their search.
We as investigators must keep our minds totally open. The type of person that's going to do this could be someone that is demented. It could be someone with a cause.
This morning, the RCMP visited CBC's Vancouver newsroom because someone hand-delivered a 2-page document claiming responsibility for the blast vowing to make this an insecure and uninhabitable place for capitalists and their projects. Several well-known environmental groups here on the West Coast are not at all happy about being tarred with the same brush as political terrorists. They say that lying down in front of a bulldozer as a non-violent means of protest should never be equated with using dynamite on a transformer.
There are alternatives.
And those who've read the document say it's obvious it was not written by a legitimate environmental lobbyist.
That's not the kind of rhetoric you would be apt to find in the environmental movement. Certainly some political groups would very much advance that sort of philosophy, though.
BC Hydro has said very little so far, except that people living on Vancouver Island may indeed experience power rationing in the winter of 1983, because the blast has delayed completion of a much-needed power line. Jerry Thompson, CBC News, Vancouver.
And finally, there was a bit of a flap in Vancouver today. It began at Lost Lagoon in Stanley Park and turned into a wild goose chase, literally. Genevieve Westcott was there.
For visitors, feeding the Canadian geese in Vancouver's famous Stanley Park is a daily ritual. And for the geese, it's paradise. Only trouble is, every summer about this time, the park is swamped with hundreds of newly hatched goslings. Park officials say they're a nuisance, so that leads to an annual roundup of the little guys. Leaving home is never easy. Some kids are braver than others, but just about all of them cried for their mothers. Before they're shipped out to new homes in wildlife sanctuaries, each gosling is given its own kind of social insurance number.
80. 80 is a female?
Not very dignified, but painless. Besides, whoever said growing up is easy? Genevieve Westcott, CBC News, Vancouver.
And that's the National for Wednesday, June 23rd.
Some of the stories we're following tonight on CBC Vancouver News.
My mom's like my best friend, so.
Ottawa is loosening its COVID-19 border restrictions to allow some family members who are separated to reunite. The change kicks in tonight at midnight. It applies to foreign nationals who are immediate family members of Canadian citizens and permanent residents. They'll be allowed to come into Canada, but will have to self-quarantine for 14 days.
Summer holidays and travel will be different this year, and I'm encouraging all of us to be respectful of the communities that we plan to visit.
Well, before you hit the open road in BC this summer, Provincial Health Officer Dr. Bonnie Henry is urging travelers to check with the destination's local tourism association and Chamber of Commerce. She says it's important to find out what services are available and be considerate of the people who live there. Dr. Henry also reported 30 new cases of COVID-19 over the last 3 days, all in the Fraser Health region, but no new deaths.
This is a 90-kilometer-an-hour zone, and I have caught some folks doing, 170 kilometers an hour. Some people took it upon themselves to think that, this is the Wild West now. I'm going to open it up on these barren roads.
Police say many drivers have been taking advantage of relatively empty streets during the pandemic and speeding. But police are now out in full force trying to catch people across the province.
Well, it's been 20 years since the death of Maple Ridge's Jessie Sidhu. Sidhu was kidnapped and murdered in a so-called honor killing in Punjab, India. It's said to be because she defied her family, falling in love with a poor rickshaw driver. Joining us now is Fabian Dawson. He's the journalist who broke this story back in 2000. He's been reporting on the case for the past 2 decades. Thanks for being on the show today, Fabian.
Thank you for having me.
20 years later, and still not much has moved in the case. Jassie's mother and uncle were extradited to India to face charges last year. Tell us what the status of the case against them is now over there.
Well, after they were extradited, the charges were framed. And so they're facing 3 charges. One is murder. The second one is attempted murder. And the third one is a criminal conspiracy charge. So that trial is winding its way down the Sessions Court level in Punjab, India currently. and the prosecution has lined up 23 witnesses for the trial, and we expect that trial to probably continue till the end of the year. It's probably been delayed because of the COVID-19 situation.
So with 23 witnesses, how likely is it that 20 years later, what they have to say, what they remember is going to be valid? So what are the chances of conviction here?
Well, initially, the chances of conviction, because they were originally, when they were extradited on a criminal conspiracy charge. And the conspiracy charge was a little weird because another of the accused, who was described as the key architect of the murder, was acquitted by the Supreme Court of India of the charge. So without having a key player, how do you have a co-conspirator? And so I think there's additional charges now on attempted murder of Jesse's husband who survived the attack and the murder charge. I do think that prosecution there is going to rely quite heavily on the testimony of the actual killers hired to do the job.
How frustrating is this for those who are advocating for justice? Many have been doing that for a long time. This is 20 years later.
Yeah, and it's the beginning of the case in India after 20 years. So you could see this drag on for some time because assuming they get convicted and the appeal processes start kicking in, you have an appeal process to the highest court in Punjab, and then after that, probably an appeal to the Supreme Court of India. So, it could take anything from now another 5 to 7 years before any kind of conclusion can be arrived at.
What's the legacy of Jesse's story? Because honor killings are still happening.
Well, if there was one thing, I think the word honor killing, as you called it, a so-called honor killing, because there's so many aspects of this story that are being looked at. One is immigration, one is dowry fraud, and another is, of course, forced marriage issues. So the book that I had written, Justice for Jesse, is currently being looked at as a text in women's studies for the universities in Canada, because you can extrapolate a lot of issues around this particular case and look deeper into the systematic abuse that is happening with some of the Indian women in Canada.
Veteran journalist Fabian Dawson, thanks so much for being on the show today.
Thank you for having me.
While life is slowly returning to something like normal, there is suffering among temporary foreign workers maintaining Canada's food supply. Hundreds have become sick and at least 2 have died. As Evan Dyer reports tonight, others say so many face grim working conditions.
As we walk into here, our first station is going to be registration.
In Windsor, Essex County, Ontario, COVID-19 is wreaking havoc for farmers and migrant workers alike.
So once we enter the swabbing stations, there will be 2 nurses at each swabbing station, and they will process the agri-farm worker.
To try to stop the outbreak, staff at this new screening center hope to test 9,000 migrant workers. They didn't bring COVID with them, but were infected in Canada, and some say that was avoidable.
Que el patrón no le interesa nuestra bienestar.
This man says his employer doesn't encourage workers to report when they're sick and doesn't seek help for those who are. Complaints like his are detailed in a report by the Migrant Workers Alliance for Change, which links the outbreaks to cramped bunkhouse living conditions and to workers' fears of speaking out.
Without the ability to be able to defend against dismissal and deportation, they are simply unable to assert the few rights that they do have.
The Canadian Federation of Agriculture denies there's a pattern of exploitation.
I just can't imagine anyone I know treating anyone the way that it's been framed in that report. It doesn't add up for me for anything I've ever seen in agriculture. It just does not add up.
The immigration minister says government inspectors haven't seen it either.
We've already carried out hundreds of inspections, and my understanding is that each and every one of those inspections has led to a compliant result.
Today, though, the PM suggested changes are coming.
We need to do a better job of protecting temporary agricultural workers in this country, temporary foreign workers in this country. We have taken a number of steps, but there's more to do, and we will do it.
In the meantime, Windsor-Essex County is hoping that testing will put a lid on this outbreak before more workers get sick and more farms are forced to stop operations. Evan Dyer, CBC News, Chelsea, Quebec.
In the UK, strict new isolation rules for travelers have gone into effect. They are mandatory for people coming from every country except Ireland. Critics say it's going to be catastrophic for the tourism and airline industries. But as Renee Filipponi reports, supporters say it's a necessary measure.
The UK government says it's making this move to prevent a second wave of the virus from travelers arriving here in the UK from other parts of the world. Now, what will happen is very similar to the plans that have been in place in Canada for some time. When travelers arrive at airports and border crossings here in the UK, they'll have to submit a form that details their isolation plan, where they're going to stay, and their contact numbers. Then for 14 days, they will have to stay inside. No going to work, no going to school, and only to get groceries if they don't have someone else who could do it for them. Now, there's a lot of criticism that this is too little, too late. Have a listen to what some people had to say at the airport.
It's from here to home, I'm going to use a public transport. So if I'm a carrier now, then how would they control it? How would you know if I've spread it to anyone else? So there's no track of that at all.
I think make no sense, because in Germany it's a rate less than here, and to infect is more likely here in the UK than in Germany.
Failure to comply could lead to a £1,000 or $1,600 Canadian fine. The airline and tourism industry have big concerns with this blanket quarantine. In fact, they're threatening legal action against the government, saying they have failed to justify why it is needed. They would like to see the country open up travel to other places in the world with low infection rates.
We think, as the airline community, that there's a decent number of countries, mainly across Europe, but further afield, where there is sufficient passenger demand. So we now need the government to really, with a degree of urgency, work with foreign governments to set up these air bridges as quickly as possible, because otherwise we're not going to have a summer season here.
Despite all this, some airlines say they still plan to ramp up travel in the coming months. The UK government will reassess its quarantine plan in 3 weeks. Renee Filipponi, CBC News, London.
Well, with travel plans dashed due to the global pandemic, BC companies are finding ways to adapt to the new normal. Coming up, what it means for tourism in our province.
You are looking at a live shot at 6:41 of downtown Vancouver. Showers will return to rain overnight. So what does that mean tomorrow? Brett breaks it down after the break, but a hint, you may still need a jacket.
The weather update is brought to you by WorkSafe BC. Visit WorksafeBC.com for workplace health and safety resources, including COVID-19 prevention.
All right, meteorologist Brett Soderholm joins us now live with the forecast. We don't like to look back, but it was an awfully nice weekend on the South Coast, and now here we are, a new week underway, a new work week at least.
New week, yeah, I totally agree with you, Mike, though. I was so happy that this weekend's forecast ended up not being exactly as predicted. It was nice to be wrong for a change, and I know that thunderstorm on Saturday morning that many people experienced, that came to mind as well. But as we transition now over the next 24 hours, the concern is going to be for a much larger storm that's going to be bringing lots of widespread rain, heavy winds, or sorry, strong winds, I should be saying, and certainly some cooler temperatures. And I want to show you that right now, just to give you a scale perspective here. If you take a look, this giant L here, this is a low pressure system making its way up from essentially just off the coast of Washington State, and it's going to be sticking around for the next couple of days, leading to some unsettled conditions. But predominantly here in the lower mainland, Vancouver Island, our north and central coast, these are going to be the regions that are going to be most impacted by this system. Places in the interior, like the Okanagan, are probably going to scrape by with just a few scattered showers here, but right now this is looking like a fairly significant system for us here on the coast. In terms of our rainfall totals, you're going to see for Vancouver Island, it's on the order of 40 to 60 millimeters in places, but here in Vancouver, I'd be thinking this will be closer to about 10 to 20, and we've only seen about 10 millimeters so far this month, so this is going to be adding to our totals nicely. The difference here, though, between what we've been seeing before is that we're going to be dealing with some stronger gusty winds, so there's the potential here to be dealing with wind gusts between 40 and 60 kilometers an hour. Temperatures for tomorrow across the south half of BC are going to be on the cool side, same thing for to the north. And when we look at what the week ahead is going to be giving for our 5-day forecast, you're going to see a return to more seasonal temperatures by about midweek. So those showers likely to be persisting, but temperatures are going back up to about 19 or 20, and we're going to be in that unsettled pattern essentially all week long.
It's unsettled June. It is what it is. Thanks, Brett. Well, with travel plans around the world dashed due to the global pandemic, BC companies are finding ways to adapt to the new normal.
Ian Hanamansing shows us what this means for tourism here in BC.
In many ways, float planes are a symbol of BC's tourist industry. For the last few weeks, a lot of them have been sitting idle, but one airline is actually expanding its schedule. It's hoping to attract BCers who had been planning to travel internationally. As we discovered, the tourist industry here this summer is filled with high hopes and reasonable expectations. There is a new pre-flight safety routine on Harbour Air. A meticulous scrub down of anything a passenger might touch. Right from check-in, it's clear pandemic flying is different.
Do you guys all have masks and gloves with you? No. Okay, perfect.
But the mandatory masks and gloves aren't just designed to reduce the risk of infection. They're also a strategy to increase confidence in flying. And in terms of wearing a mask and fewer people sitting in there, how did that go?
Yeah, it was okay. There are only 3 other people. Usually they require we wear gloves as well.
Just a routine flight?
Yeah, pretty much, yeah.
Harbour Air has been in business for almost 4 decades and says in a normal year it flies about 500,000 passengers on its fleet of 40 seaplanes. But in March, it shut down for a week, then restarted one route as an essential service.
Okay, welcome aboard everyone. My name is Corey.
This month, it's taking a shot at expanding its schedule, hoping more people are ready to fly.
We're expecting slowly for people to start being comfortable and come back. The local leisure, we're hoping passengers will explore BC. It's beautiful in our own province, and we have a way to get them to some unique destinations.
The question for Harbour Air isn't just how many people are going to sit on these planes, but it's also, will they have places to go? The company is advertising its newly expanded schedule under the banner BC Holiday. So they need the rest of the tourist sector to open up as well. Take Whistler, for example. The resort has been closed since March. At this time of year, you'd usually see hikers and cyclists everywhere. And so, for many people here, the reopening earlier this week of the resort's biggest hotel, the Fairmont Chateau Whistler,
Should I do Mum first?
Okay.
Complete with guest temperatures checked on arrival, is a sign of hope.
You know, we're cautiously optimistic.
The hotel's director says COVID has changed almost everything, from fewer seats and more plexiglass at the restaurants to keeping rooms empty for 2 days after checkout. The hotel estimates that downtime means they'll only be able to offer 30 to 50% of their normal capacity, but they're predicting pretty well all of those available rooms will be occupied.
It's the pace of bookings that are coming in now. It's the fact that we have a lot of regular clientele. And then, you know, while we can't receive guests internationally and from the US and so on, neither can BC residents travel anywhere. So we believe that all of the BC residents are busy thinking right now, well, what am I going to do for the summer? What is our vacation going to be this year?
But it's a really positive sign that they're seeing that there's confidence in the travel market. That people.
The tourism management program at the BC Institute of Technology has been tracking trends in the province.
I think people are feeling more confident, and also in British Columbia we're lucky, we have a low infection rate of new infections, and so people are feeling more comfortable that they can start doing, you know, behaviors that we couldn't have done a couple of months ago.
But like the hotel, Harbour Air's best case scenario is well below normal. With fewer flights than last summer and keeping more seats empty on bigger planes, they expect about 20 to 30% of the sales they had last year.
That's what we're projecting right now. We're hoping it's better. We hope things open up and people become comfortable, but we need to be cautious.
He is 102 years old. He's seen a lot and has some wise words to share. Coming up, meet Mozart Mims.
CBC British Columbia is hosting a virtual town hall to discuss racism. Send us your thoughts and stories by heading to cbc.ca/racism town hall. Unmasking Racism, June 17th at 7 p.m.
Well, if you are looking to gain a little wisdom on racial equality, Mozart Mims is a good man to listen to. The grandson of a slave, he was born in Kentucky just before the end of the First World War.
By the time he moved to Vancouver in the early 1950s, he'd served in the U.S. Army, graduated university, and built a successful railroad career. Today, he is 102 years old and as sharp as ever.
We asked him for his thoughts on the protests here and in the U.S. that were sparked last month when George Floyd was killed by police in Minneapolis.
I grew up in Allensville, and I went to school in Elton, Kentucky. That was the county seat to a high school. And then I moved to Nashville with my brother. I grew up in segregation. I grew up as a segregated kid. But we had our own churches, our own school and everything, and we were divided. We each went our own way. I never thought I'd get this old, you know. When my grandmother had her 80th birthday, we thought she was a relic. And now the people are like me, I'm 102, and here I am. I'm kind of glad that I'm in Canada now, because it's not very good in the United States. That's my home country. I'm still an American. And I hate to see the way things are, but it's divided now. See, it used to be united. The Democrats and the Republicans were united, and they worked together. But now with this president that I have now, he is a divider. He doesn't like to have unity. I hope it gets better, but I don't know. It seems to be getting worse. Because in the last few days, they've had all of this killing, and they've been marching and everything, and so I don't know what's going to happen now. We just have to wait and see. Well, I'd like to see change. I would like to see the two parties get together. Everybody. I'd like to see the blacks and the whites get together. But you've always had this division, and I think you'll always have it. The black-white thing. The dark race seems to be an item to themselves. And so many white don't want to mix with the dark. But you have unity. You need these people to get together. I don't know how much longer I'll live, but I've seen a lot. I've seen good times and I've seen bad times. What can I do now? And just live the best life you can. And that's what I did.
He is sharp as ever, and he certainly has seen a lot, for sure.
He's done a lot, and he's certainly seen a lot. The profound thoughts of Mozart Mims, 102.
Incredible.
All right, that's all the time we have tonight. Dan is here at 11, right after the National.
Good night.
Right.